I'm Trevor Howells. I wrote a monograph on the history of Allen Jack+Cottier published in 2003, and on the basis of that work, my little talk today is on the early years, the first 30 years of the work or selected works of Allen Jack+Cottier. This year marks Allen Jack+Cottier's 59th year since the practice began. The practice was born on the 14th of June in 1952 when John Allen established a one-man practice in Edgecliff at the time of an economic downturn. 4 years later, Russell Jack joined John Allen as an equal partner, practicing under the name of John Allen and Russell C. Jack. At that time, their clientele was small, John Allen designing a number of factories and Russell Jack a few houses. I'm going to start today by looking at some of Russell's early houses. Of his early houses, his own house at Wahroonga, which he designed in 1956 in close collaboration with his architect wife Pamela, was the first to bring the practice to widespread attention after it won the Sulman Architectural Award in 1958. It was in this house that Russell began to develop the role and character of the wall as an important generative idea in his residential architecture. A common thread in all of Jack's houses is his concern to exploit aspect and prospect, designing light-filled houses that simultaneously provide privacy and protection from the public world whilst exploiting northerly aspect and views from within their inner private realms. And looking at the plan, we can see along the bottom, the southern side, these strong, almost solid walls aligned against the public street, and to the north, the fully glazed walls opening onto the inner world of the private garden beyond. Now, this house displays a distinctive duality of transparency and opacity in its wall treatments, a characteristic apparent in all of Russell Jack's houses. Throughout his houses, Jack used a controlled palette of elements, such as flat or gently sloping roofs, floor-to-ceiling glazing, deep overhangs, as well as an array of materials and colours and textures. Whilst these were recognisable characteristics that place him within the boundaries of the Sydney School, his houses were too individual and distinctive to identify them alone with such a broad brush. On a very different site, a battle axe block devoid of rocky outcrops and surrounded on all sides by houses, Russell Jack responded in a different manner whilst employing the same basic principles. Here we can see the Jacobs house, designed in 1963, where he sought to create a house that was simultaneously outward-looking yet also introspective. By organising the plan around a number of courtyards, Jack controlled outlook and privacy whilst he adjusted ceiling heights to define an intimacy of scale and fluidity of space. In the Jacobs house, Jack's use of brickwork walls was developed further. Here, the unambiguous planes of masonry were pulled cleanly apart, not punctured, for the insertion of door and window openings. The Jacobs house, which won Russell Jack the Wilkinson Award in 1964, displays numerous Sydney-style characteristics in its use of materials, form, colours and textures. Another house of this time is Russell Jack's Cater house, designed in 1964-1965. Located in Red Hill, a dress circle suburb of Canberra, it was more overtly influenced by the Sydney School in its use of materials, massing and roof forms. Jack's interest in differentiating public and private edges is clearly established by its range of near blank walls to the street and its diffuse openness to the private garden at the back, oriented to take advantage of distant views and, of course, the northerly sun. The Cater House, which won the ACT RA Merit Award, also won the Canberra Medal, the RA 25-Year Award in 2001. The most fully developed essay in the use of the exterior wall as a defensive mechanism can be seen in Jack's Coburn House of 1963, located on an exposed open site near Wollongong. Here, instead of a linear spine that he used in his own house, Jack wrapped a high protective wall around the eastern, southern and western sides of the house to provide protection from strong westerly winds. Its sense of defensive enclosure is very potent. As you will have guessed, the living space of the Coburn House open to the north, embracing distant ocean views and, of course, the sun. A deep overhanging roof and horizontal timber screens provide privacy for adjacent bedrooms. Now, a little later, in 1959, at the tender age of 17, Keith Cottier joined John Allen and Russell Jack as a student and soon proved himself a skillful draftsman, as we can see in slightly later delightful perspective he did for Club Hall. After graduation, Keith Cottier worked in London and travelling extensively in Europe in the period 1960-1963. He returned in 1963 to Australia and resumed working for John Allen and Russell Jack. In the following 6 to 8 years, Cottier designed a string of buildings that drew inspiration from the Sydney School, sometimes defining its quintessence and at other times pushing its boundaries. Amongst his first job there was the design of the multi-purpose assembly hall and theatre concert hall for Frensham, a private girls' school near Mittagong in the Southern Highlands. Designed in 1964-65, Club Hall, as it became known, drew extensively on the language of the Sydney School in its use of stained timberwork, face brickwork and exposed off-form concrete. It is, I believe, the finest example of that movement, and it is a building that has aged incredibly well. Its manipulation of solid and void in planes of masonry skillfully modelled inside and out displayed a degree of sophistication that sets it apart from other contemporary buildings in Australia. The building won the 1967 Blackett Award, marking Cottier as a young architect of talent and potential. It also helped broaden the largely residential base of the practice of clientele. Now, nearly 50 years old, Club Hall has survived the vigorous use of several generations of energetic Frensham girls and wide public use, retaining a freshness and power that few buildings of its time possess. It's a remarkable building. In 1970-71, Cottier designed the first stage of the Rothbury Estate Winery at Pacolban in the Hunter Valley. The founders of the Rothbury Estate were pioneering Australian winemakers who were the first in Australia to combine state-of-the-art winemaking technology, direct marketing and good architecture as a means of establishing and promoting their products. Cottier combined winemaking functions with public visitation, wine tasting, over-the-counter sales, essentially inventing a new genre of Australian winery buildings. The expansive 30-degree pitch roofs were punctuated with a series of crisp angular roof lights arrayed alternatively along the ridgeline. The stepped and ramped entry and its use of roof forms, long horizontal windows and white painted off-form concrete evokes Don Gazzard's Wentworth Memorial Chapel of a few years earlier. The project falls near the end of an array of significant buildings designed by Allen Jack+Cottier, influenced by the Sydney School. Internally, Cottier mixed industrial production with public participation in a double-height cask room that was used to great effect for banqueting. Successive owners have altered the building and today it stands vandalised. Drawn to the firm by Club Hall, Peter Stronach joined Allen Jack+Cottier after graduation in 1970. In the late 70s, Stronach was involved in the reworking of a number of significant historic buildings. Amongst these was his celebrated kitchen for St Kevin's in Queen Street, Mallara, part of a major restoration of that house carried out for Anne and Leo Schofield. Stronach's conversion of a row of large Queen Anne-style terraces at numbers 46 to 50 Victoria Street, Potts Point, demonstrate his approach to balancing old and new. Stronach restored the exterior of the Grand Row, reconstructing the old enclosed balcony in an interpretation of the original detail where documentary and surviving evidence was missing. Stronach, who created his own apartment in the two uppermost floors of number 50, worked in collaboration with interior designers Marsh Friedman. George Friedman's striking colour scheme for the exterior fortunately survives to this day. Friedman's colours were bold, beautiful and gloriously unhistorical, and imbued the houses with the vibrancy that historically accurate colour scheme could probably never do. Internally within this row of houses, Stronach used a freer hand, reversing the original function of the rooms to take advantage of sweeping city and harbour views. He introduced a number of voids between living and bedroom areas, creating a series of fluid interconnected spaces over different levels, a device that later became a signature element of much of his residential design. In 1979-1980, Stronach designed 9 infill terrace houses in Woolloomooloo for the New South Wales Department of Housing. Here Stronach interpreted the traditional 19th century terrace house for the needs of contemporary social housing without the recourse to historical pastiche or ornery fakery. You can see in the simple plans of these houses that on the ground floor they comprise principally of 2 large rooms that open into each other with room for a staircase, kitchen and laundry, and a simple arrangement on the upper floor of bedrooms. In these buildings he fused traditional materials such as brickwork and corrugated steel with a directness and freshness that was much imitated later. Using a palette of vibrant colours, dubbed gelato colours by some, the houses sit comfortably amidst the older Italianate cousins and speak clearly and honestly of their time. In 1981, this project earned the RAA Merit Award. In 1981, on a very different site, Stronach designed a steel-framed holiday house for Michael Miller at Great Mackerel Beach overlooking Pittwater. Its 45-degree sloping site and lack of vehicular access played a critical role in the determination of the form and structure of the house. Stronach designed the house with a steel frame that could be prefabricated and easily transported to and erected on its steep site. Occupying 3 levels with the living zone sitting between the main bedroom above and the guest room below, Stronach organised a simple plan around a void over living room. Pared down to the bare essentials, the aesthetic evokes Stronach's passion for sailing and its use of stainless steel yachting stays for the balustrades and movable sailcloth, privacy screens on the balcony. This too was a project that involved colour. In this instance, the colour of the house, light blue painted steel framework and white painted corrugated walls and roof, led to strong opposition from Warringah Shire Council. The issue was decided in the client's and architect's favour in a landmark case in the Land and Environment Court. The expanding scope and range of Allen Jack+Cottier's commissions is well illustrated in Stronach's design in 1986 for the Apple Computer headquarters in Frenchs Forest. Greatly larger than any of their earlier projects, the office and warehouse facilities for Apple allowed the firm to explore Stronach's deep interest in pattern and form making in the service of immediate and pragmatic functions. Stronach's use of geometric abstraction is particularly evident in his handling of sun shading and the control of natural light filtered through the roof. The strict rectilinear prismatic geometry of the building was counterbalanced by the sinuous counterplay of curved glazed walls. Other new directions in practice that Allen Jack+Cottier explored in the mid-80s was a growing involvement in urban design projects. Chief amongst these was Circular Quay Station, the Ferry Wharf and Circular Quay East upgrades designed by Stronach as part of the extensive New South Wales Government program of bicentennial urban redevelopment and improvements for the Sydney CBD. Designed and built between 1985 and 1987, the projects were mainly dismantled and removed a little more than a decade later in the next wave of urban improvements. Stronach's instinctive skill in handling steel was most evident in this vigorous and muscular design of the covered walkway linking Circular Quay Station to the Opera House forecourt, drawing inspiration from the design of the glass walls of the Opera House itself. It used a system of widely spaced, alternately offset columns and upstanding masts and cable stays carrying a glazed canopy that maximised transparency and freedom of movement while minimising obstruction of the view. Sadly, this structure no longer survives. In conclusion of my brief survey of the early works of the firm, what has been the success or the secret of Allen Jack+Cottier's remarkable success over a century, half a century and more? The sustained commitment to excellence of design in an office culture that avoids the strictures of narrow or predictable house style, the identifiable signature of a single individual. Instead, the practice encouraged a diversity of architectural expression and solutions representing the wide range of skills of its designers. Allen Jack+Cottier have long pursued an active fostering of the talents and skill of the individuals who comprise it. Thank you.